There are moments in a man's life that divide everything into before and after. Not the big ones. Not the funerals and the weddings and the diagnoses. Those you see coming. At least from a distance, you have time to brace. I mean the small ones. The ones that arrive without warning in an ordinary room on an ordinary evening, and when they're over, you look at the space around you and realize that everything you thought you knew about who you were dealing with has just been updated, permanently, without your consent. For me, that moment arrived at 7:14 p.m. on a Thursday in February, in the kitchen of a house on Belmead Avenue in the Green Hills neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina. I was sitting on a chair with my right leg in a boot cast, my crutches leaning against the counter, and a dry throat. I had been awake since 5 a.m. I had driven myself to a physical therapy appointment that morning and back, which with a broken leg and a 2019 F250 is the kind of accomplishment that should come with a certificate. I had eaten half a sandwich because reaching the refrigerator was an operation that required planning. And at 7:14 p.m., I looked at my son-in-law across the kitchen of the house where my daughter lived, the house I had financed, and I said, "Daniel, would you mind getting me a glass of water?" What he said back to me, I am going to tell you exactly, because I want you to understand what the next 48 hours were built on. He looked up from his phone. He looked at me, and he said, "Go crawl for it yourself. I'm not your damn servant, old man." Then he went back to his phone. My daughter Isabella was standing at the stove. She didn't turn around. She just stood there, stirring something that didn't need stirring, staring at a pot. I sat with that for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when you're counting. Then I picked up my crutches, put them under my arms, made my way across the kitchen on a broken leg, filled a glass at the sink, drank it standing there at the counter, didn't say a word, went to the guest room, and closed the door. And at 11 p.m. that night, I made a phone call that lasted 94 seconds. I didn't know yet what those 94 seconds were going to cost Daniel Cross, but I had a pretty good idea. Welcome to Sweet Family Revenge. Get comfortable, grab something to drink, and remember, the people in these stories had every single chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Subscribe below and drop a comment. My name is William Harrington, 64 years old. Charlotte born, Charlotte built. I have lived in this city since before the honky-tonks on Broadway were considered charming rather than profitable. Back when Printer's Alley still smelled like cigarettes and ambition, and the two were hard to tell apart. I raised 2 children in the Sylvan Park neighborhood in a house that Diane and I bought in 1989 for $74,000, and that would sell today for something that would make your eyes water. Diane passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that gives you very little notice and even less time to argue with it. She was 61. She was the sharpest person I have ever known, and the kindest, which is a combination that the world produces rarely and wastes far too often. I spent 31 years building Ashford Capital Partners, a mid-market private equity firm operating out of a suite of offices on West End Avenue. Not flashy, not the kind of firm that gets profiled in magazines, the kind of firm that identifies undervalued businesses, structures intelligent investments, and makes very quiet, very consistent money over a very long time. We have 14 portfolio companies across 9 states. I know each one the way a farmer knows his fields, not from a distance, but from standing in them. I retired from day-to-day management 2 years ago. Retired is a flexible word when you own equity stakes in 14 companies and have an attorney named Gerald Okafor who calls you every Tuesday at 9 a.m., whether you want him to or not. My daughter Isabella is 37 years old. She has her mother's laugh and my stubbornness, which is honestly the most dangerous possible combination. And I say that as a man who has negotiated against some very stubborn people in 31 years of private equity. She's beautiful in the way Diane was beautiful, not performatively, just constitutionally, like good posture, like something she doesn't think about. She married Daniel Cross 5 years ago. Daniel Cross is 39 years old. He runs a boutique wealth management firm called Northbridge Solutions, out of an office in the Gulch neighborhood of Charlotte. He drives a Porsche Cayenne that costs more than my first 2 cars combined, wears watches that have waiting lists, and has a very specific way of entering rooms that suggests he has thought about how he enters rooms. He is, by his own accounting, self-made. His word. He uses it constantly. At dinner parties. At Isabella's school fundraisers where their 2 kids go to a private school in Belmead. In the bio on Northbridge Solutions website, which I have read because I read everything. Daniel Cross, founder and CEO, self-made entrepreneur, built from nothing. I want to tell you about the night Daniel Cross almost lost his company. It was a Thursday in October, 5 years ago, 6 months before he married my daughter. Isabella had called me from the parking lot of a Publix on Hillsborough Pike at 9 p.m., crying in the way she only cries when something is actually wrong and not just frustrating, which is a distinction I learned to make when she was about 4 years old. Dad. Her voice was thin. Daniel's firm. It's in trouble. Real trouble. They burned through the operating line. The lease is up for renewal, and 2 of his analysts just left. He's not going to make it another quarter. Okay, I said. He doesn't know I'm calling you. He'd be furious. I know, I said. Can you? Is there anything? Go home, I said. Take care of dinner. I'll handle it. What I did over the next 3 weeks, I structured through an entity called Ridgeline Capital Advisors, a holding vehicle that Gerald manages and that has no public connection to my name. I brought in 2 of my partners as co-investors to further dilute any trail back to me. We invested $2.3 million in Northbridge Solutions as a Series A institutional round, structured as preferred equity with a 34% stake. We saved Daniel Cross's company 3 weeks before he proposed to my daughter. He never knew. Isabella never told him, partly because I asked her not to, partly because she understood instinctively what it would do to his sense of himself, and partly because my daughter, despite everything, has always tried to protect the people she loves, even when they don't deserve it. For 5 years, Daniel Cross had been calling himself self-made. For 5 years, he had been 34% mine. I had never intended for him to find out that way. But at 7:14 p.m. on a Thursday in February, he made a choice that changed the intention. Let me tell you about the broken leg, because context matters. January 31st, 7:30 in the morning. Black ice on the driveway of my house in Sylvan Park, which is a neighborhood that does not get enough ice to justify the infrastructure for handling it properly. I stepped off the porch. My right foot found approximately 0 friction, and the next thing I was aware of was lying on the concrete looking up at a very gray Charlotte sky, thinking 2 things simultaneously. This is going to hurt tomorrow, and I should have gotten that salt spreader Diane always wanted. The ER at Vanderbilt Medical confirmed a clean break of the fibula, just above the ankle. 6 weeks in a boot. No driving for 2 weeks, no weight bearing for the first 10 days, and a set of crutches that immediately became the most annoying objects I had ever owned. My son James, who is 34, lives in East Charlotte, and has the specific energy of a man who was raised by a father who valued competence, and has spent his adult life proving he absorbed that. Offered to have me stay with him. His apartment has stairs, and he has a rescue dog named Biscuit, who weighs 97 pounds and has no spatial awareness whatsoever. So I declined. Isabella called the same afternoon. Dad, come stay with us. We have the guest room. It's on the ground floor. It makes sense. I don't want to impose. I said, you're not imposing. You're injured. Come. Daniel hadn't been on the call. I didn't ask whether he'd been consulted. I should have asked. I moved in on February 1st, a Wednesday. Ellen, my housekeeper, who has managed my house on Sylvan Park for 11 years with the efficient authority of a woman who runs a small country, packed a bag for 2 weeks and drove me over herself, which I had not asked her to do, but which I also did not argue with because Ellen doesn't lose arguments. Call me when you need to come home, Ellen said, setting my bag in the guest room of the Belmead Avenue house and looking around with the assessing expression of a woman cataloging the cleanliness of another woman's space. I'll be fine, Ellen. I know you will, she said. Call me anyway. She left. I got settled. Isabella made dinner, roast chicken, which is her mother's recipe and which she executes perfectly. And the 3 of us ate at the kitchen table and it was fine. Daniel asked about the firm. I gave him the abbreviated version. He nodded with the specific quality of attention that men give when they're listening to information they've already decided isn't relevant to them. Fine. The first 4 days were fine. I didn't know yet that fine was the most temporary condition in that house. By day 5, I was aware of a pattern. Daniel came home at 6:30, changed clothes, sat in the living room with his phone, had dinner when Isabella brought it to the table, watched television, went to bed. He did not ask me how the leg was healing. He did not ask if I needed anything. He did not carry my bag to the kitchen or adjust his path around my crutches, or do any of the 14 small things that living with an injured person in your house requires if you are a person who notices that other people exist. Isabella was attentive in the way she always was, checking on me before she left for work in the mornings, leaving water and a snack on the nightstand, calling from the office at lunch. Isabella noticed. Isabella always noticed. Daniel noticed his phone. I observed this without comment. I am 64 years old. I have been observing people without comment for most of those years. I filed what I was seeing in the appropriate mental folder and continued. On day 7, Daniel came home in a worse mood than usual. Some deal that had gone sideways, from what I gathered through the walls. And Isabella made the mistake of asking him about it at dinner, and he gave her a version of not now that was not especially kind, and I watched my daughter's face do something quick and practiced and sad, and I filed that in a different folder. On day 9, I dropped one of my crutches in the hallway and couldn't reach it without putting weight on the broken leg, and Daniel walked past me to get to the kitchen without picking it up. I filed that one in a third folder. On day 11, the Thursday, the 7:14 p.m. Thursday, I asked for a glass of water, and Daniel Cross told me to go crawl for it. The guest room on Belmead Avenue is a fine room, 12 by 14. Good mattress. The en suite works. There's a window that looks out at the side yard and a magnolia tree that Diane would have loved, which I tried not to think about too much. I sat on the edge of the bed with my water glass and my boot cast, and the specific stillness of a man who has made a decision and is being very quiet about it. Not angry. Anger is a feeling. What I was doing was calculating. I picked up my phone, opened the contacts, scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 4 months. Gerald Okafor, my attorney of 22 years, former partner at Bassberry Sims, the man who had structured every significant deal of my professional life, including the Ridgeline Capital investment in Northbridge Solutions in October of 5 years ago, including the 34% preferred equity stake that Daniel Cross had been sitting on without knowing it for every day of his self-made career since then. Gerald answers his phone after 10 p.m. approximately never. He answered on the second ring. William. His voice had the careful neutrality of a man who knows that a late call from a client means something has changed. Everything all right? Gerald, I said. I need to discuss my position in Northbridge Solutions. A pause. Okay. I'd like to exercise my shareholder rights, I said. I want to request a board review, emergency audit of executive compensation and personal expenses billed to the company. Standard shareholder request. Nothing aggressive, nothing illegal, nothing that can't be explained as routine diligence. A longer pause. William, Gerald said carefully. What happened? He told me to crawl for a glass of water, I said, in his house, in front of my daughter. The line was quiet for a moment. I'll have the request prepared by morning, Gerald said. Do you want it delivered by certified mail or through the board directly? Certified mail, I said. I want him to sign for it himself. Consider it done. We talked for another 43 seconds about the specific language. Then I hung up. I set my phone on the nightstand, looked at the magnolia tree through the window. I didn't know yet exactly what the audit was going to find, but I had a 34% stake and 22 years of Gerald Okafor, and the specific patience of a man who has been in private equity for 3 decades. That's generally enough. Daniel signed for it at 8:47 a.m. I know because I heard the doorbell. I was in the guest room with coffee that Isabella had left on the nightstand before she took the kids to school. She always left coffee. She was her mother's daughter in every important way. And I heard the doorbell, and then I heard the front door, and then I heard the specific sound of a man accepting a certified envelope from a postal carrier. Then silence. Then, after approximately 90 seconds, the sound of a man walking very quickly across hardwood floors. My door opened without a knock. Daniel was standing in the doorway in his work clothes, the good suit, the one he wore for client meetings, charcoal with a light stripe, holding the open envelope in one hand and the letter in the other. His face was doing something complicated that I recognized from 30 years of deal negotiations as the face of a man who has just received information that has reorganized his understanding of his situation. What is this? He said. Not a question. A statement delivered in the flat tone of a man who knows exactly what it is and is hoping the act of asking will somehow change the answer. Good morning, Daniel, I said. I picked up my coffee. You're going to want to close the door. The heating bill in this house is already unreasonable. Looked at the letter again. This says Ridgeline Capital Advisors is requesting an emergency audit. He looked up. Ridgeline Capital is your firm. Ridgeline Capital is a holding entity managed by my attorney, I said. Among other things, it holds a preferred equity stake in Northbridge Solutions, 34% to be precise. The room was very quiet. You own part of my company, Daniel said. I've owned part of your company for 5 years, I said, since October the year before you married Isabella. He went absolutely still. I watched him run the math, watched the timeline assemble itself behind his eyes. October, the investment, the firm that had been 3 months from bankruptcy, the Series A that had come through at exactly the right moment from an institutional source he'd never been able to fully identify, because Gerald is very good at what he does. You, he said. Me, I said. You saved the company. He said it like he was testing the weight of the words. 5 years ago, Isabella called me from a Publix parking lot, I said. She was crying. You were about to lose everything. I took a sip of coffee. I handled it. She knew? She knew I did something. She didn't know the specifics. I asked her not to tell you. Why? The word came out with something that might have been genuine confusion. Why wouldn't you tell me? Why wouldn't you? That's something a person tells. Because, I said, you would have refused it. He opened his mouth, closed it, because he knew I was right. Daniel Cross, self-made entrepreneur, would have refused $2.3 million from his future father-in-law rather than admit his company needed saving. He would have run the company into the ground first. He would have told Isabella it was fine, right up until it wasn't, because that's what men who have built their entire identity around the word self-made do when the walls start closing in. I hadn't told him because telling him would have destroyed the thing I was trying to save. I want to be clear that I had not done it for Daniel. I had done it for Isabella. And for the grandchildren who didn't exist yet but who I had assumed were coming. Daniel was just the vehicle. So for 5 years, Daniel said slowly, you've had, what? A stake, a seat at the table. You could have. I have never once exercised any shareholder rights, I said. I have never attended a board meeting, never reviewed financials, never interfered in any decision. Gerald manages the position passively. As an investment, I set down my coffee cup, until last night. He stood there, the certified letter in his hand, the open door behind him letting cold February air into the guest room. You're doing this, he said, because of a glass of water. I'm doing this, I said, because of what a glass of water told me. I want to be accurate about what the audit actually found, because this story is not about manufacturing consequences. It's about consequences that were already there, already built, waiting for the right moment to become visible. Gerald's firm spent 11 business days on the Northbridge Solutions audit, standard shareholder requested review, financial records, expense reports, corporate card statements, executive compensation documentation, the kind of review that every company should be able to survive without difficulty, assuming the company has been run cleanly. Northbridge Solutions had not been run entirely cleanly. Gerald called me on a Tuesday afternoon, day 5 of the audit. With the preliminary findings, I was back home in Sylvan Park by then. Ellen had come to get me the morning after the certified letter arrived, because Isabella had called her, not me, Ellen, and said, I think it's probably time for Dad to come home, which was Isabella's way of managing a situation that had gotten complicated in her kitchen. I hadn't argued. I'd packed my bag, said goodbye to Isabella in the hallway with a hug that she held onto a beat longer than usual, and let Ellen drive me home. The expense reports are a problem, Gerald said on the phone. $41,000 over 18 months billed to Northbridge corporate accounts that appear to be personal expenditures. The Porsche lease is partially on the company. A vacation to Turks and Caicos in March, charged to the corporate card as a client entertainment expense. The clients listed were not present per our conversations with the firm's calendar system. A pause. There's more, but that's the shape of it. What are the implications? I said. For the audit, he'll need to reimburse the company for the personal expenses or face a tax and compliance issue. For the firm's investors, all 3 of you hold preferred equity. You have grounds to request executive performance review. And the credit line the company's been operating on has a clean hands clause. If the bank becomes aware of the compliance issue, The credit line gets reviewed, I said. At minimum, Gerald said. I sat with that. I hadn't gone looking for ammunition. I'd just turned the lights on in a room that Daniel had been keeping dark. The day the audit report was delivered to the Northbridge Solutions Board, a Thursday, exactly 3 weeks after the glass of water, Daniel called me. He called from the office. I could hear the particular quiet of an empty conference room behind him, the kind of quiet that happens after everyone else has been asked to leave. William, his voice had lost something. The architecture of it, the assembled confidence, the professional smoothness, was still technically present, but underneath it was something structural that had shifted. Daniel, I said, the audit. He stopped. Started again. The expense items, I can explain most of them. The Porsche lease was an error in how my bookkeeper categorized. Daniel, I said, and the Turks and Caicos trip was legitimately business-related. We had preliminary conversations with a client about a managed. Daniel, quieter. Stop. He stopped. I'm not interested in the explanations, I said. Gerald is interested in the explanations. The board is interested in the explanations. I'm interested in something else. What? I want to know, I said, what my daughter's life looks like inside that house. Not the outside of it. The inside. I want to know whether my daughter is happy, whether she's treated well, whether the man she married is the man he presented himself as being.
There's letters in this too, other than numbers.
Yeah.
Why are there letters?
Because they ran out.
Another silence, longer. I love Isabella, Daniel said.
Cowgirl, it's called
I know you think you
Stay
do, I said.
by Lewis
I'm asking about the
Watson.
behavior. Behavior is how love is measured at 64. You stop accepting the feeling as a substitute for the conduct somewhere around 40, if you're paying attention. He was quiet for a long time. I've been under a lot of pressure, he said. The firm, the growth targets, my wife was dying of cancer. I said, I still got her a glass of water when she asked. The line was completely silent. I think, I said, that you have some things to figure out. About who you are when no one's doing you a favor. About what the word self-made actually costs the people around you while you're building it. I paused. I think you need to have a long, honest conversation with my daughter. Not about the audit. About everything the audit is a symptom of. When he did, his voice was different. Not broken. Daniel Cross was not a man who broke easily, but quieter. Like something had been turned down. Is there a way through this? He said. The audit. The board review. Is there... Gerald manages the position, I said. Talk to Gerald. What I want to talk about is Isabella. Everything I know about the audit, I said. Nothing I know about the investment. That conversation is between you and her. She's going to, and then she's going to decide what she wants to do. And whatever she decides, I'm going to support. I paused. That's what fathers do, Daniel. We support the decision. We don't make it. If you've been listening for a while and you want stories like this to keep coming, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. 97% of people never do, and it's what keeps this channel running. So thank you, genuinely. And drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from right now. That Thursday evening, Isabella called me at 7:30. I was sitting in my own kitchen on Sylvan Park with real coffee and Ellen's leftover pot roast, and my boot cast elevated on a chair, which is the correct and dignified way to spend a Thursday evening when you have a broken fibula. Dad, hey sweetheart, Daniel told me. A pause. About the investment. About Ridgeline. About all of it. Okay, I said. 5 years. She said you've had 34% of his company for 5 years, and you never said a word. No, I said. Why? I told him this morning, because he would have refused it. She was quiet. And because, I said, a gift with your name on it isn't a gift. It's a transaction. More quiet. Mom would have told him, Isabella said. Your mother would have told him at the dinner table the same week and made him cry and then made him laugh, and it would have been better handled than anything I've done here, I said. Your mother was better at all of this than I am. I heard her exhale. The exhale that contains both a laugh and something sadder than a laugh. The exhale of someone thinking about a person who isn't there. We talked, Isabella said. Daniel and I. For a long time. Good, I said. He didn't know I'd called you from that parking lot. He didn't know any of it. I know. He was embarrassed, she said, which is not the same as sorry. But he was embarrassed, which is at least the starting point. That was her mother talking. What are you going to do? I said. I don't know yet, she said. I think we have some work to do. Both of us. A pause. He's going to reimburse the company for the expense items. Gerald is working out a repayment structure. Good. And she stopped. He came home tonight and made dinner. He doesn't cook. He made pasta, which was terrible, and he brought me a glass of water without being asked. Her voice did something complicated. He didn't say anything about it. He just brought it. At the magnolia tree through the kitchen window, not the one on Belmead Avenue, my own, the one Diane had planted in the backyard 20 years ago. That's something, I said. It's a start, she said. Some stories end with the arrest. Some end with the certified letter. Some end with a man standing in a doorway holding an envelope, the self-made story collapsing in real time behind his eyes. This one didn't end there. It ended on a Sunday morning in March, in my kitchen on Sylvan Park, with a 97-pound dog stepping on my boot cast. James Harrington arrived at 9:08 a.m. with 2 coffees from the 12th Avenue shop, a paper bag of pastries, and biscuit, who entered the house with the boundless energy of an animal that has never once considered that other creatures have personal space, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. James is 34 years old. He has my jaw and Diane's eyes and the specific directness of a man who grew up watching his father take meetings and learned that the fastest way through any situation is to name it accurately and deal with it accordingly. He works in commercial real estate on the east side of town and has strong opinions about everything which he shares without being asked, and which are usually correct, which makes the not being asked part more tolerable. He set a coffee in front of me, pulled biscuit away from my boot cast by the collar, sat down. Tell me what actually happened, he said. Not the version you told Isabella, the actual version. I looked at him. Those are the same version, I said. Dad. He had his mother's look. The one that meant, I know you are being precise in a way that is designed to avoid being complete. Try again, I told him. All of it. The parking lot phone call 5 years ago, the ridgeline structure, Gerald, the 34% stake, the 5 years of silence, the certified letter, the audit, the expense reports, the Porsche lease, Turks and Caicos billed as client entertainment, the glass of water, the 3 seconds of silence after. James listened the way he always listens, elbows on the table, coffee in both hands, completely still in a way that is unusual for a man his age and size. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react visibly. He just took it in, the way you take in weather. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You saved his company. Yes. And he told you to crawl. He picked up a pastry, looked at it, set it back down. You know what bothers me most about this? He said. Tell me. It's not Daniel. He looked up. I mean, Daniel is a project. A human improvement project that my sister has apparently decided to take on, which is her right and her choice, and I support it. He said this in the tone of a man who supports something while also having significant reservations about it. What bothers me is Isabella, standing at the stove. I said nothing. She's been doing that, James said, standing at the stove, not turning around. For how long, Dad? It was the right question. It was the question I'd been sitting with since February. I don't know, I said, because that's not new, James said. The Daniel thing, the not getting the water, the crawl for it, that's not the first time he's been that way. That's the first time you were in the room to see it. I held my coffee. She called me from that parking lot 5 years ago, I said. Crying. She wasn't crying about the company, James. She was crying because she was scared for him, scared of what losing the company would do to him. I paused. Not to her. To him. Yeah, he said quietly. That's what I mean. 2 weeks after the audit report landed, Gerald called me on a Tuesday morning as usual. Update on Northbridge Solutions, he said, with the efficient tone of a man who has managed complicated situations for 22 years and has developed a specific clinical register for delivering them. Daniel has executed a personal repayment agreement for the expense discrepancies, $41,000 over 12 months. The bank reviewed the credit line and elected to maintain it given the documented remediation plan. The board has accepted the repayment structure.
She just giggles
Okay,
after.
I said. The co-investors are satisfied with the outcome, Gerald continued. No further action
Sunny and the
requested.
feistiness,
A pause.
yes, Tinty.
And William, Daniel called me directly last week.
And then
I hadn't expected that. What did he want? He wanted to understand the original investment structure, Gerald said. He had questions about why it was done anonymously, how the entity was set up, what the intent was. Another pause. I told him I'd answer questions about the structure, but that the intent was a conversation he'd need to have with you. What did he say to that? He said he'd already had it. Gerald's voice carried something, not warmth exactly, approximation of it. He also said, and I'm passing this along for informational purposes only, William, that he'd like to request a formal introduction, as a shareholder, not anonymous anymore. I sat with that. Daniel Cross wanted to meet the investor who had saved his company and then spent 5 years saying nothing about it. He wanted to understand what that meant. He wanted, as best as I could tell from a second-hand report through Gerald, to reckon with the full shape of what he'd been operating inside without knowing it. That required something from him that I hadn't been sure he had. Turns out he had more of it than I'd given him credit for. Set up a meeting, I said. Lunch. Somewhere neutral. I'll let him know, Gerald said. We met at a restaurant on Charlotte Avenue. A quiet place, good food, the kind of lunch spot where conversations don't carry. A Wednesday in March, 53 degrees outside. The sort of day Charlotte does in early spring where the light is thin but present, like the city is making a considered effort. Daniel was there when I arrived. He'd gotten there early, which told me something. He stood up when I came in, which told me something else. He was in a jacket but no tie, not the client meeting armor, the slightly reduced version. He looked like a man who had been thinking hard about something for several weeks and had arrived at a conclusion he wasn't sure how to deliver. I sat down across from him. The waiter came. We ordered. Neither of us touched the bread. I want to say something, Daniel said, and I want to say it before we talk about anything else. What I said to you in that kitchen was, he stopped, tried again. There's no version of that sentence that ends well, so I'm not going to finish it. I'm just going to say that it was wrong, completely, indefensibly wrong, and that I've been thinking about what it says about who I've been. Not just that night, but, he gestured vaguely, in general. I waited. Isabella and I have been in counseling, he said. 2 weeks now, every Tuesday. It was her idea and I agreed to it, and I want to be honest with you. It's been harder than anything I've done professionally, including the audit. He almost smiled. The audit was just humiliating. The counseling is actually difficult. That's usually how it works, I said. The therapist asked me, first session, to describe my relationship with success. He turned his water glass. I talked for 20 minutes and she stopped me and said, "You've described what success looks like." I asked what it feels like, and I didn't have an answer. I looked at him. He was doing something I hadn't been sure he could do. He was being honest without an agenda. The company, Daniel said. The investment. The fact that you... He exhaled. I keep coming back to the parking lot. Isabella calling you at 9 p.m. crying in a Publix parking lot because she was scared, and you picking up the phone and saying, "I'll handle it," and then handling it, quietly, without telling anyone, without wanting credit. She's my daughter, I said. That's not a remarkable thing. It is, though, he said. From where I'm sitting, it is. He looked at me directly. I've been calling myself self-made for 5 years. I believed it. I built a whole identity around it. And the truth is that the foundation of the thing I've been proudest of was built by a man I told to crawl across his own kitchen. The restaurant was quiet around us. "Daniel," I said, "I didn't invest in your company because I believed in your company. I barely knew your company. I invested because my daughter was crying in a parking lot and I could make it stop." I paused. The company earned the rest. The 5 years of growth, the client base, the reputation on the street, that's yours. I provided the floor. You built the house. He looked at me for a moment. "You've been sitting on that for 2 weeks, he said. Longer, I said. I just needed a reason to say it. Something shifted in his face, not dramatically, just settled. The food came. We ate. We talked. About the firm, about the repayment structure, about the co-investors, about how Gerald was going to restructure the ridgeline position going forward now that the anonymity was no longer serving any purpose. Practical things. The practical layer over something that neither of us was going to say explicitly, but that was present in the room regardless. I didn't know yet what Daniel was going to do with the thing that had shifted, but I had 31 years of reading people across tables, and I had a feeling. 6 weeks after the glass of water, a Saturday morning in mid-March, I was at the house on Sylvan Park. Boot cast off, doctor had cleared me to transition to a walking brace, and I was attempting with moderate success to make my own coffee in my own kitchen without leaning on anything, which after 6 weeks felt like a personal achievement significant enough to warrant some internal acknowledgement. The doorbell rang at 10 a.m. Ellen was off on Saturdays. I made my way to the front door. Daniel was standing on the porch. Not Isabella, not the kids. Daniel, alone, in jeans and a jacket, holding a paper bag from the bakery on Murphy Road that I had mentioned once, in passing, as the place Diane used to buy the good cinnamon rolls on Saturday mornings. I looked at him. He looked at me. Isabella doesn't know I'm here, he said. Okay, I said. I brought... He held up the bag slightly. I asked Isabella a few weeks ago where you used to take her mother on Saturday mornings. She told me about this place. He paused. I wasn't sure if it was... I didn't know if it would be... Come in, I said. He came in. I made coffee. Real coffee, not the half measure I'd been making for myself. And we sat at the kitchen table in the Saturday morning light, which in March in Charlotte comes through the east windows at a low angle and turns everything slightly golden in the way that makes you understand why Diane had always said this was her favorite room at this time of day. Daniel set a cinnamon roll in front of me. I looked at it. Diane's cinnamon rolls. From her bakery. Brought by the man who had told me to crawl 6 weeks ago. Life is not tidy. It is not neat. It does not resolve the way you plan it to. But sometimes it resolves. Thank you, I said. Thank you, Daniel said. We ate in the Saturday morning quiet. After a while, Daniel said, I want to be better at this. I looked at him. At what? At. He gestured. At being in a family. At understanding what that actually requires. He turned his coffee cup. I grew up in a house where my father was... Absent isn't quite the right word. He was physically present, but he was absent in the ways that count. And I think I've been... He stopped. I think I became him without noticing, and I don't want to be him. The counseling, I said. Yes. And he looked at me directly. Having someone in my life who shows me what it looks like when it's done right. I didn't say anything for a moment. He was asking me something without exactly asking it. He was asking me to stay. There's a thing Diane used to say, I said finally. When the kids were young and she was managing everything, which is what she did. She managed everything. She used to say, families aren't built in the good moments. The good moments are the reward. Families are built in the ordinary ones. The Tuesday nights, the glasses of water. I paused. The Saturday mornings. Daniel nodded. Slowly. I'm working on the Tuesday nights, he said. I know, I said. Isabella tells me, something almost like a smile. She tells you everything. She tells me the things she needs me to know, I said. Which is everything. He laughed. An actual laugh. Not the assembled version. Not the client meeting laugh. The real one. There was the man underneath the armor. Took a broken leg and a certified letter. And a Tuesday counseling appointment. And a bakery on Murphy Road to find him. But he was there. The boot cast came off completely on a Monday in late March. I drove myself to the appointment. F. 250, my own 2 hands, no assistance. And I drove home and pulled into the driveway on Sylvan Park and sat there for a moment in the quiet. 6 weeks. Belmead Avenue. A glass of water. 94 seconds on the phone with Gerald. The audit had cost Daniel $41,000 in personal reimbursements, and whatever the credit line review had cost in sleepless nights. The ridgeline position was being restructured, still 34%, but formally acknowledged now, no longer anonymous, a real relationship rather than a quiet fact in a filing cabinet. More importantly, or at least as importantly, or at least in a different way that I was still working out how to rank, Daniel Cross was in counseling every Tuesday. He was making dinner on nights Isabella asked him to. He had shown up on a Saturday morning with cinnamon rolls from a bakery he'd had to ask my daughter about, specifically because he wanted to do something right. I didn't know yet whether that was going to be enough. Nobody knows that in March. You find out over years. But I know what enough looks like in its early stages.
What happened?
And this had the shape of it. I went inside, made coffee. Ellen was in the kitchen. She had reinstated her Tuesday and Thursday schedule when I'd gotten home from Belmead, citing the housekeeping backlog, which was her way of saying she'd been worried about me. She looked at my leg, at the absence of the boot. Finally, she said. Finally, I agreed. Sit down, she said. I'll bring you something. Ellen, I'm fine. Sit down, William. I sat down. She brought me coffee, set it in front of me, looked at me with the direct expression of a woman who has managed my house for 11 years and earned the right to say whatever she thinks. How's the daughter? She said. Getting there, I said. They both are. And the son-in-law? I thought about a Saturday morning. Cinnamon rolls. The actual laugh. Getting there, I said. Ellen looked at me for a moment. Then she went back to whatever she was doing at the counter, which is her way of indicating that the conversation has reached a satisfactory conclusion. I sat at Diane's kitchen table in the March morning light and drank my coffee. Diane would have had opinions about all of this. She would have had opinions, and she would have shared them, probably all at once, probably over dinner, probably in the specific tone she used when she was right and knew it, and wanted me to admit it first. She would have been right. She would have said the point was never the audit. The point was never the 34%. The point was the family. It was always the family. The audit was just the way the family found its way back to itself. I put my hand flat on the table. Got him, Diane, I said to the kitchen, to the east window light, to the magnolia tree in the backyard that she had planted, and that blooms every March without being asked. Got him the right way, the slow way. I picked up my coffee. You would have done it better, but I got him. The coffee was good. The leg didn't hurt anymore. And somewhere on Belmead Avenue in the Green Hills neighborhood of Charlotte, North Carolina, my daughter was making Saturday plans with a man who had driven to a bakery on Murphy Road to buy cinnamon rolls for a father-in-law he was still learning how to deserve. It wasn't perfect. Nothing worth keeping ever is. But it was honest. And it was ours. And for a Saturday morning in March, that was exactly enough. If this one got to you somewhere real, if you thought about your own family, your own Saturday mornings, your own person who brought coffee without being asked, then you already know why sweet family revenge exists. This channel is for every parent who ever sat quietly in a room and chose patience over reaction. For every father who did something for his child that he never once asked for credit for. For every family that came through something hard and found each other on the other side with the honesty they should have had from the beginning. If you like this story, join our community, hit that like button, and subscribe for more real, raw, family-centered stories. Genuinely, it's what keeps this channel going, and we're grateful for every single person who does it. And before you go, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. City, state, country, wherever you are right now in the world. This story started in a kitchen in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Thursday evening in February, and I want to know how far it traveled. Someone out there is thinking about a person they helped quietly, a thing they did without putting their name on it, a family they've been holding together without being thanked for it. You're not alone in that room.